All of us are on a journey of grace. Every single one of us. We're somewhere in this journey of grace. It begins in the book of Genesis. And in Genesis, we start out in the Garden of Eden. And in the Garden of Eden, we all had unbroken fellowship with God. That's where God was just us and him. It was face to face. There was nothing there. It was just pure fellowship with God. And then Adam sinned. And as a result, man is separated from God. And so we begin the book of Genesis in creation, in fellowship with God. We end the book of Genesis with separation, where man is separated from God. The very last word, in fact, of the book of Genesis, the very last scripture says that Joseph died. It ends with death. Begins with life, ends with death. So the book of Genesis is about separation. In Exodus, God delivers us from bondage to the tyranny of the world under the dictatorship of Satan, represented by Pharaoh and Egypt. And God defeats all the false gods of Egypt. And so Exodus is about salvation. So we begin separation. God saves us. We come into salvation. In Leviticus, then, God calls us into relationship with him. That word offering means to draw near. In the Hebrew, it's korban. It means to draw near. And so Leviticus is about drawing near to God. It's about adoration. And so we begin in separation. We experience salvation. And then we're drawn into, invited into this relationship of adoration with God. And then in Numbers, God proposes to Israel to enter into this eternal marriage covenant, and Israel accepts that. And we've talked about how Numbers is like the betrothal process where we are experiencing what it means to be separated out of the world, to be taken out of the world and being joined to God in an eternal relationship. And in the New Testament, that process of separation, being separated from the world, becoming separate from all other people, and to be joined to God is called sanctification. Sanctification. It's the process of being separated. And so we have separation, we move into salvation, adoration, and then sanctification. And now we're in the book of Deuteronomy. And in Deuteronomy, we learn that the basis of our relationship with God and his relationship to us is love. It's a relationship of love. And so Deuteronomy is about devotion. Devotion. So we go separation, salvation, adoration, sanctification, and then a life of devotion to God, being devoted to him. And so in order to understand the book of Deuteronomy, in order to rightly divide it, to frame it in your mind and to understand what it's saying to you, you have to read it through the lens of God's love. You have to read it from the perspective of one who has entered into that relationship of love with God. Otherwise, you will read it through the lens of God's law. And instead of seeing the love of God, all you're going to see is rules and demands and expectations, and ultimately a legalistic God who wants nothing more than to control your life against your will. You know, it's his will, right? We're praying, thy will be done, not my will. So it's against my will. And that's how many Christians see God. Many Christians see God as harsh and demanding with a lot of rules to follow that don't really make sense. Many of them are outdated for today because we're in modern society, right? And when you look at the scriptures, I mean, there's things that are common today that are totally natural that God says you can't do. It's like, how can he, he doesn't apply to us anymore. For instance, it's very common now for people to live together before they get married. To live as married people without being married. That's like what you do, right? You love each other, you move in. That's like the big commitment before you jump in all the way and get married. Because, of course, if it doesn't work out, then you just go your separate ways. And yet the Bible teaches something different. But you see, that is the natural way that you would think about God. That's the natural way that you would feel about God if you didn't know God. If you didn't know him, if you hadn't surrendered your life to him, if you haven't entered into that relationship of love with him, then you'll see him as just a harsh rule maker.